a stained toilet bowl can be made spotless, again using nothing more than 2 ingredients that have sat in English pantries for over 100 years. No bleach, no branded cleaner, no scrubbing until your arm aches. Just bicarbonate of soda and vinegar. Used the way my grandmother used them, and the way her mother used them before her. My name is not important to most who watch, but for those who ask, I am Arthur Whitfield, and I was raised in a stone farmhouse in the Yorkshire Dales. There was no running hot water in that house until I was nearly 10 years old. There was certainly no cupboard full of colored bottles promising to do the work for you. What we had instead was a larder stocked with plain, honest ingredients and a grandmother who knew exactly how to use every one of them. She taught me how to scrub a bowl until it shone using a spoonful of soda and a splash of vinegar. And she taught me why it worked, not just that it did. I watched her do this every week of my childhood, in every house I ever stayed in, and I never once saw her reach for anything from a shop shelf to do it. Our farmhouse sat 2 miles from the nearest village shop, and in winter, when the lanes turned to mud and then to ice, that distance may as well have been 20%. You learned to keep a full larder, and you learned to make what was in it stretch across every task the household needed, whether that was feeding a family or keeping the house clean and presentable. Bicarbonate of soda sat on the same shelf as the baking supplies, next to the vinegar used for pickling vegetables from the garden, and nobody in that house thought of either one as a cleaning product first. They were simply useful things put to whatever use the day required. I am sharing this now because fewer and fewer households still know it, and it seems a shame to let something this useful slip away entirely. Somewhere along the way, cleaning a toilet bowl became something you buy rather than something you know how to do. Shelves filled up with thick blue liquids and scented gels, each one promising stronger stain removal than the last. Each one costing more than the one before it. Many of these products are, at their core, milled acids and abrasives, dressed up in color and fragrance. Sold in a bottle with a brand name attached, at a price far higher than the raw ingredients would ever cost on their own. There was money to be made in convincing people that cleaning required a specialist product for every single surface in the house. And once that idea took hold, the plain household staples our grandparents relied on quietly fell out of daily use. The truth is rather plainer than any of that marketing suggests, and it always has been. What you are about to hear is not a theory dreamed up for a video. These were the working methods of households that had no other choice but to make their own cleaning solutions, tested across decades of use in homes with hard water, soft water, old pipes, and tight budgets. They worked then, and they still work now, because the chemistry behind them has not changed one bit. The first thing to understand is what vinegar actually does to a stain. Ordinary white distilled vinegar contains around 5% acetic acid, and that acid is mildly corrosive to the minerals that build up inside a toilet bowl. Limescale rust deposits and the gray ring that forms just below the waterline are largely mineral in nature, and mild acids break down mineral bonds far more effectively than most people expect. In my grandmother's day, malt vinegar was more common in Yorkshire kitchens than the white variety, and it works nearly as well, though it will leave a faint amber tint if used too generously on light surfaces. For a toilet bowl, this hardly matters, since the vinegar is rinsed away long before anyone sees it. A pint of white vinegar in the 1970s cost only a few pence, and even today, it remains one of the cheapest liquids you can buy in any supermarket, usually less than £1 for enough to last several months of regular cleaning. Keep a bottle under the sink rather than in a cupboard across the house, because you will use it far more often than you expect once you start. The second ingredient works in a different way entirely, and this is where most people are surprised. Bicarbonate of soda, which some call baking soda, is a mild alkaline salt, and its cleaning power comes from 2 separate properties rather than one. First, it is gently abrasive, fine enough not to scratch porcelain, yet coarse enough to lift grime that a cloth alone would simply push around. Second, when it meets an acid such as vinegar, it produces a chemical reaction that creates small bubbles of carbon dioxide, and this fizzing action helps to physically lift stains away from the surface they are clinging to. This is not decoration, and it is not for show. The bubbling action loosens particles that have bonded to the porcelain, particularly in the pores and hairline scratches that develop in a bowl over years of use, places a cloth or brush cannot properly reach on its own. During rationing in the Second World War, when cleaning products were scarce and every household good was tightly controlled, bicarbonate of soda remained available because it was also used for cooking and for settling upset stomachs, and so it became one of the few reliable cleaning agents ordinary families could still get hold of. Before you begin the actual cleaning, there is a preparation step that most instructions skip entirely, and skipping it is where most people go wrong. You must first reduce the water level inside the bowl, because both ingredients work far better when they are in direct contact with the porcelain rather than diluted in standing water. The simplest way to do this is to pour a bucket of water forcefully into the bowl, which pushes the standing water down through the trap and temporarily lowers the level. In older country houses, without a modern flush mechanism, this was simply how every wash began, using whatever water was already to hand. Often the leftover water from washing vegetables or clothes, since nothing in a frugal household was ever thrown away without a second use first. Once the water level has dropped, you are ready to begin the real work. And this is where the two methods diverge, depending on what kind of stain you are dealing with. It is worth mentioning that in many rural households before the war, water itself was not something to waste carelessly, particularly where it had to be carried by hand from a well or a rainwater, but cleaning day was planned around this, and the household routine was arranged so that water used for one task was rarely poured away without first being considered for another. That habit of care, of never wasting a resource simply because it was inconvenient to reuse, is perhaps as valuable as any of the specific methods themselves, and it is worth carrying forward even now that water runs freely from every tap. For general staining and everyday discoloration, the paste method is what my grandmother used most weeks of the year. Take roughly half a cup of bicarbonate of soda and sprinkle it directly around the inside of the bowl, paying particular attention to the waterline and just beneath it, where staining tends to concentrate. Follow this with a cup of white vinegar poured slowly around the same area, and you will see the fizzing reaction begin immediately, sometimes rising quite dramatically depending on how much residue is present. Take a toilet brush with stiff bristles, not a soft one, and scrub firmly while the mixture is still active, working in circular motions rather than up and down strokes, since circular motion covers more surface area with each pass. Leave the mixture to sit for 10 minutes once you have finished the first scrub, allowing the chemical reaction to continue working on stains the brush could not fully remove. After 10 minutes, flush the toilet, and in most cases, the bowl will already look markedly better than it did before you started. If any faint marks remain, do not be tempted to reach for a stronger chemical straight away, since a second application of the same paste method, given another 10 minutes to work, will usually finish the job that the first pass began. Patience was the real ingredient in most of these old methods, far more than any single product on the shelf. And it is the one thing modern cleaning has largely trained us out of. We are used to instant results now, promised on every bottle in bold lettering. And when a natural method takes 15 minutes instead of 30 seconds, it is easy to assume it has failed rather than simply needing a little more time to finish its work. But that is only the first method, and for stains that have been building for months or years, a stronger approach is needed. This is the overnight soak, and it was the method reserved for the deepest, most stubborn staining. The kind that builds up in a household over a long winter when cleaning becomes less frequent, simply because everyone is occupied with keeping warm and keeping fed. Begin the same way by lowering the water level in the bowl. Then apply a generous layer of bicarbonate of soda across the entire stained area, using closer to a full cup rather than a half. Instead of pouring the vinegar immediately, soak strips of old cloth or paper directly in vinegar and press them against the worst of the staining, particularly beneath the waterline where a scrubbing brush struggles to maintain contact. Leave this in place overnight, or for at least 6 to 8 hours, if overnight is not practical, allowing the acid time to slowly dissolve the mineral bonds holding the stain to the porcelain. In the morning, remove the cloths, apply fresh vinegar directly to the bowl, and scrub thoroughly with the brush. You will notice considerably less resistance than the day before because the overnight soak has already done the difficult work for you, and the brush is simply finishing what the chemistry started. The tool you use matters almost as much as the ingredients themselves, and this is a point most households overlook entirely. A soft nylon brush, the kind sold cheaply in every supermarket, is often not stiff enough to do the job properly, particularly on staining that has been left to build for some time. My grandmother preferred a brush with natural bristle, coarser and more rigid than the modern equivalent, kept in a simple tin holder rather than the plastic caddies sold today. If the bristles have gone soft or splayed, replace the brush entirely, because a worn brush simply glides over a stain rather than lifting it, no matter how much vinegar and soda you apply beneath it. For the most stubborn mineral rings, particularly those that have hardened into a raised ridge just at the waterline, a pumice stone can be used alongside the chemical methods rather than in place of them. Wet the pumice stone thoroughly before use, and always keep both the stone and the porcelain wet throughout, since a dry pumice stone will scratch a dry bowl, while a wet one glides smoothly and lifts hardened deposits without damaging the glaze beneath. Work in small, gentle strokes rather than pressing hard in one spot, and let the vinegar soak do the heavy work first, using the pumice stone only to finish what the soak has already loosened. This combination, vinegar to soften, soda to lift, and pumice to finish, was the standard three-step approach in households dealing with genuinely old, neglected staining, the kind found in a house left empty for a season or bought secondhand with years of someone else's neglect still clinging to the porcelain. Hard water stains deserve their own explanation, because they behave differently from ordinary discoloration, and treating them the same way often leads to disappointment. In regions with hard water, which includes much of the south and east of England, as well as large parts of Australia and the American Midwest, dissolved minerals in the water supply, mainly calcium and magnesium, gradually build up into a hard-crusted deposit called limescale. This deposit is often a dull white or yellowish color, and it feels rough or gritty to the touch rather than smooth like ordinary staining. Because limescale is denser and more tightly bonded than surface grime, it responds better to concentrated, undiluted vinegar left in direct contact for a longer period. Warm the vinegar slightly before use, since heat increases the rate at which acid reacts with mineral deposits, though it should never be heated to boiling, as this weakens its acidity rather than strengthening it. Pour the warmed vinegar directly over the limescale, cover the area with cloth soaked in more vinegar if the deposit is thick, and leave it for a full 2 hours rather than the usual 10 minutes. Only then should bicarbonate of soda be introduced, sprinkled over the softened deposit and scrubbed away with firm, steady pressure. And you should find the limescale lifts away in flakes rather than requiring you to grind it down. Rust staining is a separate problem again, and it is where most household cleaners, whether old or modern, tend to fail entirely. Rust marks usually appear as an orange or reddish streak, often running down from the waterline or pooling near the base of the bowl, and they come from iron particles carried in the water supply, particularly common in homes with older plumbing or a private well. Vinegar alone struggles against rust, because the acid is simply too mild to break the iron oxide bond on its own within a reasonable time. For this particular stain, my grandmother added one further ingredient that many people have forgotten entirely, and that is cream of tartar, a fine white powder once found in every country kitchen for baking purposes. Mix cream of tartar with a small amount of vinegar until it forms a thick paste, roughly the consistency of double cream. Then apply this paste directly onto the rust marks and leave it for 30 minutes before scrubbing. The mild tartaric acid in cream of tartar is considerably more effective against iron staining than vinegar alone, and this combination was commonly used on enamel baths and sinks as well, not just toilet bowls, wherever rust from old iron pipework left its mark. If cream of tartar cannot be found, a paste of borax and lemon juice makes a reasonable substitute, since lemon juice contains citric acid, which behaves similarly against iron deposits, though it tends to work more slowly and may need repeating. Some households prefer not to work with vinegar at all, finding the smell too sharp in a small bathroom, and there is a reasonable substitute worth knowing. Fresh lemon juice contains citric acid rather than acetic acid, and while it is somewhat gentler in its action, it performs a similar role against staining and leaves a noticeably more pleasant smell behind it. Use the juice of 2 to 3 lemons in place of the cup of vinegar in either the paste method or the overnight soak, and expect the process to take slightly longer, since citric acid works a little more slowly than acetic acid on mineral deposits. In country households, lemons were something of a luxury compared with homemade vinegar, which could be produced at home from leftover fruit scraps or spoiled cider. So vinegar remained the more common choice, with lemon reserved for occasions when a particularly fresh scent was wanted, such as before visitors arrived. Either acid will do the job, and the choice between them comes down to preference rather than effectiveness. There is also the matter of ongoing odor, which is a separate concern from visible staining. Though the two are often addressed together out of habit, a clean bowl can still hold a faint stale smell if the trap and the area just under the rim are neglected. Since this is where residue tends to collect out of sight, dip an old toothbrush or a narrow bottle brush in vinegar and run it carefully around the underside of the rim, where the small holes that release water during a flush are located. Since these holes clog with mineral deposits over time and can carry odor along with them, this is a step almost nobody thinks to do. Yet it is often the true source of a smell that seems to return no matter how often the visible parts of the bowl are cleaned. Do this once a month, and you will find the problem rarely returns at all. Keep watching, because the next part is the step that determines whether all this work needs repeating every few weeks or only rarely. Prevention was taken just as seriously as the cleaning itself in households that could not simply buy their way out of the problem, and the habit is a simple one to build. Once a week, rather than waiting for visible staining to appear, sprinkle a small amount of bicarbonate of soda into the bowl before bed and leave it untouched overnight, allowing it to gently absorb odors and begin loosening any early mineral buildup while the bowl sits unused. In the morning, a quick pass with the brush and a normal flush is usually all that is needed. And this single habit alone prevents the kind of deep staining that later requires the overnight soak or the rust treatment. This weekly habit costs, at today's prices, only a few pence each time, compared with branded toilet cleaners that can run to several pounds per bottle and rarely last a full month in an average household. There is one safety matter that must be addressed plainly, because it is important and because it is where people occasionally come unstuck. Never combine vinegar or bicarbonate of soda with bleach or with any cleaning product containing bleach. Since mixing an acid with bleach can release chlorine gas, which is genuinely dangerous even in small amounts within an enclosed bathroom. If your household normally uses a bleach-based cleaner, flush the toilet thoroughly and allow the bowl to sit empty of any chemical residue before beginning the vinegar and soda method, and always ensure a window is open or an extractor fan is running while you work, simply as good practice. This was understood instinctively by earlier generations, not because they had studied chemistry, but because they had learned through direct experience which combinations of household substances were safe to mix and which were not, knowledge passed down as carefully as any recipe. It is a small point, but an important one, and it is exactly the kind of detail that gets lost when knowledge is passed along casually rather than taught properly from one generation to the next. A method that works wonderfully well on its own can become genuinely hazardous when combined carelessly with something else. And knowing the difference is just as much a part of this knowledge as knowing the methods themselves. There is a final method worth knowing, one used less often but valuable when the others have already done most of the work and only fine polishing remains. Take a small amount of bicarbonate of soda on a soft, damp cloth, not the brush this time, and gently buff the areas just above the waterline, where a dull film sometimes remains even after staining has been removed. This step was often reserved for Sunday, when the household prepared for visitors or for church, and a truly clean bowl was considered a small point of quiet pride, a sign that a home was properly kept, even if money was tight. It takes no more than 2 or 3 minutes, and it is the difference between a bowl that is merely clean and one that genuinely shines. Reflecting on all of this now, what strikes me most is not that these methods work, because of course they do. Chemistry has not changed since my grandmother's time. What strikes me is how easily something so simple and so cheap was allowed to be forgotten, replaced by products that do largely the same job for many times the price. Wrapped in packaging that suggests the work is somehow more complicated than it actually is, there was never anything complicated about it. A spoonful of soda, a splash of vinegar, and a little patience were enough for generations of households who managed perfectly well without a cupboard full of colored bottles. None of this knowledge was ever truly lost, only quietly set aside as something simpler took its place on the supermarket shelf, and simpler is not always the same as better. I think often about how much of my grandmother's kitchen wisdom I nearly let slip away myself. In the years when I was younger and busier and happy enough to reach for whatever was quickest off the shelf, it was only later, watching prices climb and cupboards fill with bottles I could not always pronounce, that I found myself returning to the plain methods I had been shown as a boy. There is a particular satisfaction in cleaning your own home with 2 ingredients you understand completely, rather than a product whose contents are listed in letters too small to read properly. It costs less, it works as well or better, and it asks nothing of you except a little time and a willingness to do the job yourself, rather than pay someone else to have done it for you in advance. That, to me, is the whole of what these old methods were ever about. If this has been useful to you, there are more methods where this one came from. I share a new one every day, drawn from the same kitchen table where I first learned them, and there is no reason any of it should stay forgotten. There is a great deal more sitting in that memory than a bit of cleaning advice, from keeping a house warm without spending a fortune on it, to growing food through a long winter, to mending what breaks rather than replacing it outright. None of it is complicated, and none of it requires anything you cannot already find in your own kitchen or your own garden. The old ways are still here. You only have to know where to look.